Tilea's Troubles, Part 152. The Battle of Usola. The western reaches of Usola, south of Urbino, autumn 2405. As soon as the fleeing elves met with Captain Rich's Reman force, Lord Veluthil declared it was time to make another stand, to face the enemy again. The Arabiati riders had already departed, and the dwarves had died buying the elves time to escape, although the dwarves' lack of fleetness had already spelled their doom. Veluthil's army had not just evaded the enemy's claws, it had also maintained good order throughout its flight, enabling it to form a line of battle beside the Remans within 2 hours of their meeting. The Remans, having the largest regiments in the newly allied army, formed the centre. A large body of pikes stood in their midst, while one wing was formed by handgunners, joined by the priest of Mo, Father Uguccione Mara, and the other consisted of a regiment of men-at-arms bearing great swords and led by Captain Cyrus Ritchie himself. Captain Tristano Tronolone, the army standard-bearer, stood with the pikes, bearing the blessed battle flag of Mo, which lent courage to all those near it who fought for the lawful gods. Better still, there was many a man in the line who had fought against the ratman horde at Palamtrina. Those soldiers had a confidence gifted by their victory in that previous battle, not only fueling their own courage, but assuring the rest that Remans were entirely capable of defeating the Uomini Ratto. There were more Remans elsewhere in the line, including the great gun on the hill to the right of the massed rank and file, and a little company of brave pistoleers trotting elegantly down the road, looking almost as if they were upon a pleasant countryside excursion, albeit one which required armour and a brace of pistols. High Lord Veluthil's sylvan elves mainly formed the army's right, except for the newly reformed Charlian riders, who had led the Remans here. These came up on the left of the Reman foot regiments, their harness clattering and their heavy-bladed lances held aloft. Only 2 had been a part of the original company that had fought beside the Remans before, first in Reman service, then later in Pavonan service, being Lord Silvano's bodyguard, in several battles in which the Pavonans had been allied with the Remans. The rest of the elves came up cautiously. Indeed, a large body of glade archers formed up behind the hill, as if afraid of ascending it, there to be spied by the enemy. This choice of position elicited muttering among the Remans, who were forced to consider what kind of soldiers believed they could win a battle by hiding. It seemed especially odd, as the elves were renowned archers, with bows that could easily shoot as far as the very best longbow made by man. Why would they stand where their bows could not be employed from the off, and so reducing the number of volleys they could loose? What the Remans did not know was the ratmen's proven ability to summon magical storm winds to play havoc with all such volleys. Lord Ulawar had not wanted to dishearten the Remans with this knowledge, believing it were for the best that the men marched onto the field without such fearful concerns. But the elves themselves knew, and their own caution arose from that knowledge. To the glade guard's right, and further forwards, were the glade riders, the 3 wizards, Veluthil, Askal and Ulawar, Kioran Brightmoon and the Deepwood Scouts, as well as the Warhawk riders and the bolt thrower that had been hastily but expertly rebuilt with surprising speed after its carriage in pieces during the flight. Reinforcements, in the form of yet more glade guard commanded by Captain Hedre Eadwillow, another bolt thrower and a small body of deadly wild riders were on their way, ordered to move as quickly as possible to join the army, but circumstances had forced Veluthil to engage the enemy before they arrived. Lord Veluthil and Lord Ulawar Greenstone rode close to each other, but not together. The glade riders were ahead of them, still playing the part of bodyguards by screening their masters. Their banners fluttered sharply in the premonitory breeze as they strung their bows in preparation for the fight. Behind the lordly wizards was the army's baggage train, now mostly made of Reman wagons, carts and mules, what with much of the elven baggage necessarily having been discarded during their rapid retreat over the last weeks. A Charlian sister, robed in white, walked with the baggage, no doubt wondering what terrible and bloody injuries she might soon be attending. Askal Arkenvale's approach was somewhat more bold than her master's, for she was mounted upon a warhawk, and led another 5 such riders from the front. Once again, the ratmen very definitely had the advantage of numbers. During their long pursuit of the foe, they had reorganised their ranks and files so that despite having lost 70 slaves as casualties in the previous battle, they could still field 2 large mobs of 36. Out on the rats' far left were 2 companies of Giselles and a body of censer-bearers, who had climbed the little hill upon that flank. Beside them, skirting the hill's upper slopes, came tortured men-slaves, whipped on by their cruel masters, their minds addled by a form of frenzied desperation. Next to them trundled a lightning cannon, and beyond that came a large regiment of clan rats. These were dwarfed by the even larger body of plague monks to their right, in the front rank of which strode not only their priestly commander, but also the army's magical banner-bearer, the source of so much grief for the elves in the last battle. Then came the second body of slaves, and the purple-clad storm vermin. These elite warriors formed Grey Seer Lord Kralk's bodyguard. Quite the change from the slave warriors who had accompanied him at Bisavera. The regiment's standard-bearer not only carried the colours, but also 2 elven heads taken from the dead at Bisavera, with which he intended to taunt the foe. This was the great press of warriors the Remans faced. Clearly a threat, despite the ratmen's poor show at Palamtrina. The far right wing of the army sported another lightning cannon and a large company of poisoned wind globadiers, with the furthermost body being a great mass of giant rats, driven down the road by a line of packmasters in the rear. Behind this impressively swollen line was the rats' baggage, including the mysterious chest that once again the elven wizards could sense, as its magical potency elicited eddies in the etheric winds across the entire field. Even as the rats ordered their ranks and files, the horse and hawk riders moved up, the former finding shelter behind the copse of trees their wizards had conjured into being the previous night, while the latter took a bolder approach in the open. Out on the far left flank, the Reman Pistoliers also came up, along the road, although there was an air of caution about their advance. Lords Veluthil and Uloa also moved a little forwards, although it seemed they were doing so simply so that they might remain concealed behind the advancing bodies. Just as the elves had dreaded, but quite a surprise to the Remans, the magical power of the rats' army standard was now awoken, and in that moment, before even one arrow was loosed, ethereally charged storm winds whipped violently across the full length of the field. Nevertheless, the Glade Guard archers belatedly mounted the hill, while the Pistoliers began to slow their already cautious pace. As Lord Veluthil conjured a magical blessing on Askal and her warhawks, Lord Uloa threw a curse at the Giselles on the hill ahead, killing one. The Reman cannon crew, upon the hill opposite, could see the enemy's discomfort, which lifted their spirits a little. This momentary optimism was soon quelled, as their gun barrel shivered into pieces upon their first attempt to fire, killing all of them instantly. The rest of the Allies' shooting was almost as disappointing, as a consequence of the winds wrenching at every archer upon the field. The Glade Riders felled one of the enemy's far left flank Giselles, causing them to flee the field altogether, while the Hawks, currently forced to the ground by the winds, killed another of those who had been cursed only moments before, causing the last to flee. Elsewhere, nothing was achieved, as every arrow flew wildly off target. Whether or not the enemy noticed was unclear, for they too had to contend with the noise and buffeting of the storm. Nevertheless, they now advanced boldly, clearly intent on closing on the elves and Remans as quickly as possible. As the huge mass of giant rats moved along the road towards the little company of Pistoliers, the entire centre of their battle line surged forwards. Every step they took made both elves and men feel smaller, further stirring the feeling of dread in the pits of their stomachs. The Reman handgunners were struggling to apply powder to their pans in the swirling winds, some even having to pat out burning patches on their clothes as sparks flew from their match cords. Unlike their fellows on the far flank, the Giselles fleeing from the hill came to a halt. Before that hill, the human slaves were being driven through the copse of trees towards the elven riders. Lord Kralk was satisfied as he looked out from the front rank of his bodyguard, for the magical storm winds had yet to lessen one jot, and the enemy looked weak and strung out, even the elven riders on their barded steeds. He was less satisfied, however, with his first attempt at magic, failing to conjure lightning against those same riders, Then, only momentarily happy with the scorching curse he summoned to kill 11 of the enemy pikemen, because before he could revel in the harm he had caused, shards of the etheric heat he had summoned flickered around him, drawing blood from his own flesh and causing him to lose his hold on the last wisps of magical energies he was juggling. As the storm raged on, the brave Reman Pistoliers decided the enemy grenadiers were the real danger to their comrades' flank, and so they charged them, losing 2 of their number before they reached, and then another upon entering the melee. The Glade Riders also took bold action, moving up the slopes ahead of them to mount the hill. In the centre, the Reman foot soldiers stood their ground, intending to receive the enemy's charge at pike point, to make their stand howsoever desperate it might be. Yet not all in the allied army were willing either to advance or merely make a stand. Much to the Reman's surprise, several companies of elves now began to fall back. The Tilean riders by the Reman's left simply turned, and neatly so, to begin trotting away, eerily calm as they did so. Less gracefully, for they were still forced to the ground by the enchanted gale, the hawks also retreated, although still facing the foe, to the edge of the hill, where the last of the smoke from the shivered gun swirled in the unnatural winds. Lord Veluthil sought continued concealment behind the hawks' large feathered frames, while Lord Usola retreated to a spot behind the bolt-thrower. From these temporary refuges, the 2 wizards' attempts at magic all failed, although the Morite priest, Father Uguccione, standing with the handgunners, managed to kill 5 of the storm vermin with a flurry of fireballs. The handgunners beside him muttered among themselves, for what with their continued struggles in the storm to load their pieces, they had rather hoped he might have targeted the mass of robed rats closing directly on them. Little did they know that the source of their magically induced misery was being borne at the fore of that same regiment. Once again, very little was achieved by the elven archery. Even the impressive skill of Lord Veluthil himself failed to send an arrow flying true through the winds. Now, just as the elves on both flanks quietly commenced their careful exit, the rats attempt to engage the foe, to the front and to the left. Kralk and his bodyguard, the rat slaves, monks, clan rats, censer-bearers and human slaves, all lurched onwards. But something stalled them, an infectious uncertainty, causing each to doubt the rest would go through with the charge, and every one of them failed to reach the enemy, instead stumbling to a momentary halt. Nevertheless, as the men-slaves began pouring through the trees and the censer-bearers came a-swinging in their direction, the elven hawks flapped furiously to escape, struggling up the hill and past the ruined gun and blocking the line of sight of the elven archers. The great central mass of rats might have failed in that moment, but this made none among the Remans, standing in the midst of the field, feel remotely confident about their chances. Most presumed the lurching motion had been a form of cruel taunt, that the enemy had feigned a charge just to witness the men flinch in fear, thereby further discomforting them before they were truly struck. Not one Reman thought the rats would actually withhold their charge. When the rats did come on, after a moment or two to reorganise their ranks and to revel in the smell of fear from their foe, the Remans would find themselves outnumbered 2, maybe 3 to 1. Worse still, even more ratmen were arriving upon the field, for in that same moment another large regiment of clan rats marched up to the rear of the baggage train, then wheeled to face the elves on the hill, the better to prevent any attempt by the riders to interfere with the mysteriously precious contents of the chest. These reinforcements had been attempting to catch up with Kralk's army for 2 weeks, thwarted daily by the fact that the army was in rapid pursuit of the foe. They were led by an engineer who immediately conjured lightning from his bladed and wired staff to kill 2 of the enemy riders. The warriors with him agreed amongst themselves that he obviously meant business, and wondered whether he alone might deal with that particular foe, allowing them to rest rather than fight after their long and tiresome march. Lord Kralk slew 4 more pike with magical fire, while the Jezzails failed to find their mark against the elven riders, and the crew of the leftmost lightning cannon struggled to ready their gun to fire in the winds. Not so the lightning cannon on the far side of the field, however, for this sent a flashing arc of deadly heat all the way to the hilltop, killing no less than 5 of the riders. This slaughter elicited a cheer from the newly arrived clan rats, for it seemed they would not be required to risk their lives at all on this day. The last surviving elf, most likely plain stunned by the horror all about him, did not flee, but chose instead to spur his mount to launch a last and almost certainly fatal charge. As the Pistoliers continued their desperate combat against the Globadiers, and the Reman foot regiments braced themselves for the inevitable, the elves continued their retreat from the field. The carts and wagons in their baggage were hauled away, while the Tilean riders continued their leisurely exit. Curan and his scouts moved back, as did both the archers and hawks, who made their way down the far slope of the hill. Lord Veluthil, his heart sinking in like manner to the last battle, kept a watch upon the foe as his own army withdrew. Once again he had decided that to continue the fight would lead to his army's certain ruin. He was not willing to sacrifice so many of his people in a pointless act of doomed defiance, even if it meant the death of the Remans. He knew his reinforcements were on the way, so that even in flight his army would grow in strength rather than diminish. His only goal was to ensure the safety of Teta Verde Forest and his own realm within. Neither would be achieved by his army's annihilation here. If he could keep this army intact and join with the reinforcements, then he would still have a hand to play, whether that was by fighting once more somewhere here in the west, or by falling back to make a last stand at his sylvan home. And so it was, as the storm continued to thwart almost every attempt to shoot, and the elves continued streaming away, their wizard spells all failing, the rats took a breath and recommenced their charge. This time they smashed almost as one into the Remans, with only the clan rats failing to keep up, perhaps disheartened by the blood-spattered death of several among them to the handgunners' countershot. The storm vermin found themselves fighting side by side with the slaves against the men-at-arms, while the monks joined the slaves on the other flank to take on the pikemen. Lord Veluthil realised the human slaves were pouring towards him, and so now fled himself, riding so fast that he outstripped both Curan Brightmoon and the hawk-riding Askal, who glanced at him as he galloped between them. Both understood, as did every elf on the field, that they were expected to leave as soon as possible. Even now the magical storm still blew, despite the banner's bearer being caught up in the melee, ensuring any attempt at archery would be pointless, quite literally. With more rats arriving on the field, and the failure of the flanking reinforcements to arrive, there was no hope of victory for the elves, and no hope, it seemed, of survival for the Remans. Even the Pistoliers, who had defeated and scattered the Globadiers, now rode on as if accepting their fate, never to be seen again. Lord Erlac's cruel mastery of magic enabled him to conjure a curse so potent it killed 9 pikemen. The ratman priest drew forth a blessing to poison the monks' blades, but he was so jostled by the melee that he lost control of the energies weaving about him, and they burst out to kill 2 slaves, 3 plague monks, and 3 more pikemen. Before Captain Ritchie could issue a challenge, the army standard-bearer Captain Tronoloni stood forth. His fight was as brief as it was bloody, for he was cut down by the enraged priest, who had become all the more crazed by the stinging of his own magic. All across the chaotic, swirling melee there was great slaughter, but the sheer weight of numbers favoured the rats, and after a swathe of casualties, the surviving Remans, to a man, broke and turned to run. Of those who escaped the enemy's blades in that first moment of flight, very few were to live to the next hour, as the rats poured on in glee to hack at their backs. And so, Sir Lord Kralk had won his second great victory, yet still the elves had escaped, almost intact. There would soon be grumbled complaints throughout Tilea concerning the elves' way of fighting. Some questioned why they were not willing to risk harm to themselves in battle, while entirely happy to abandon men and dwarves to their doom. Others went much further, employing the words craven, spineless, and traitorous in their angry opinions.